I mentioned about the Arctic. I see the Arctic as an area of tremendous both opportunity and challenge. Characterize our force structure and capabilities in the Arctic vis-a-vis Russia, particularly in the area of icebreakers.
Senator, the United States is an Arctic nation, and the security environment in the Arctic is changing as navigation passages open and access to natural resources opens up as well. We must remain engaged in the Arctic. The Navy has developed a roadmap to increase our capability in the Arctic to pace this changing security environment. We are partnering closely with the whole of government and other sister services, particularly the Coast Guard in this area.
But isn't it true that in terms of icebreakers, which are the road builders of the Arctic, we have one little country road and they have a bunch of interstate highways. There's something like 40 icebreakers, we have one.
Yes, sir. Senator Admiral Zukamp from the Coast Guard has testified, I think, in very clear terms that we need to address this icebreaker situation.
I think it's a serious problem that we're going to have to really put some attention to. And I understand it's in the Coast Guard's jurisdiction, but it certainly affects your ability to operate in that region.
We're absolutely closely partnered. No daylight between us on that.
Admiral, for that testimony on the Arctic, I know that Senator Sullivan will have more on that, but it seems to me that just the icebreaker situation is indicative of the difference in emphasis that Russia and the United States seem to place. Would you agree with that?
Sir, if you just look at the resources, they've been very focused in the Arctic for a long time, sir.
And again, I want to tell you, I look forward to your confirmation. I wholeheartedly support it. I would ask some questions about concerns in the Arctic, but I have a feeling that my colleague here is going to do a better job of that than I can because he's got a bird's eye view. But I think it is an area that we all share a concern and would appreciate your support in addressing his and all of our concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral, good to see you again. Great to see your family. My father was also a Navy officer, also a father of 6 kids. When I joined the Marine Corps, he reminded me on a daily basis that the Marine Corps was a department of the Navy. Is that true?
That is true, yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I'll make sure he knows that. I do want to touch on the Arctic. The actual numbers are, as Senator King mentioned, 1 icebreaker for the United States, about 40 for Russia. They're building 5 to 6 new ones. Some of them are nuclear powered. I mean, we are completely just not even in the game. And you know the importance. I must admit, I was a little disappointed by your answer to Senator King because what I see is happening is the Arctic and icebreakers are becoming kind of a bureaucratic football. So, for example, 4 months ago, I asked Assistant Secretary of the Navy Stackley to just give me a straight-up answer on the Arctic, on icebreakers. He kind of did the same thing. Well, it's a little bit in the Coast Guard realm. Well, the question is it in the national interest of the United States to have more than 1 icebreaker when the Russians are trying to own the Arctic? What's your answer?
I think the answer is clearly yes.
Okay, so I think what we need to do is not keep talking about, I've never gotten an answer from the Assistant Secretary of the Navy 4 months ago. I never got an answer. We just need to know, do we need it? How many? And then how do we get there? No more kind of, well, it's the Coast Guard's problem, not really the Navy's. In the 70s, the Navy was the service that supplied icebreakers to the country, wasn't it?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
Yeah, so I think we need to just get through the bureaucratic red tape. It's clearly in the national interest. You just stated it. Everybody states that we need to move forward and quit kind of doing the football back and forth between the Navy and the Coast Guard. Would you agree with that?
Senator, I am not interested in a bureaucratic approach to this. We need to have a plan of action, and I look forward, if confirmed, to working with our partners in the Coast Guard to address this in real terms.
Okay, and it'd be good to hear back from Assistant Secretary Stackley. I asked him a question on this 4 months ago. He said he'd get back to me. He never has. Just a real quick question, just a yes or no answer. We had an amendment in the NDAA supporting the Pacific rebalance that said there was a sense of the Congress that the services should increased force posture to give credibility to the rebalance. Is it, should services be free to ignore the defense guidance of the Congress? Just yes or no in the NDAA?
No.
Okay, finally, I want to draw your attention to the chart and some of the handouts we had here. This relates to China's reclamation activities in the South China Sea. This is an example. It's 18 months before and after of the Fiery Cross Reef. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Admiral. It's actually 2.7 million square meters, 505 football fields, a 3,000-meter airstrip long enough for any PRC military aircraft. It's just a huge, one of their large reclamation projects. We were recently in Singapore, a number of us at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and Secretary Carter gave a speech that I thought was quite strong on what our policy is. But there seems to be a confusion in the policy. So Secretary Carter stated, we will continue to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. He then stated, after turning an underwater rock into an airfield simply does not afford the rights of sovereignty or permit restrictions on international air or maritime transit. However, PACOM Commander Harris, just 2 weeks ago at the Aspen Security Forum, stated it is U.S. policy to afford a 12-minute limit around all of the islands that are in the South China Sea. And it's been a long-standing policy, not because they're occupied by China or built up by China, but just in general. He later clarified his statement to include islands and formations. Do you think, first of all, to me, that's very confusing policy. Do you think that we need to clarify that? And do you think that Admiral Harris's statement is just a de facto recognition of China's reclamation strategy? And is it in your best professional judgment, should we be sailing within 12 nautical miles and not allowing the facts on the ground strategy to be changed by China to essentially recognize Fiery Cross Reef and other places? It's a really important issue, and there's no clarification from the White House, State Department, or Department of Navy. I think Secretary Carter and Admiral Harris's statements are actually very contradictory. That kind of uncertainty can create miscalculations.
Senator, I think it's absolutely important that the Navy continue to be present in that region for a number of reasons, to provide our continued presence. We are there as a matter of routine in international waters. We do have to respect the legitimately claimed territorial boundaries. I think that Secretary Carter and Admiral Harris would agree with me there. And
But does that mean respecting that in terms of a 12 nautical mile radius?
Sir, I'd have to look at exactly which of those claims are legitimate. It's a dynamic situation. There's competing claims down there. But the bottom line is we need to get down there, understand the truth, make that very clear, and be present in that area so that we don't get shouldered out of the South China Sea.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be submitting questions for the record to make sure that the policy of the United States is clarified on this important issue, because right now it's very murky.
Good luck. Senator Blumenthal.